Hi everyone, welcome to the Vault Crown Records Management's Digital Transformation Podcast series. My name's Kevin Widdop, I'm the Digital Transformation Sales Lead here at Crown. On today's episode of the show, we've got Kellie Peters, Director of DataBasix and also self-proclaimed data rockstar. So Kellie and her team at DataBasix adopt a people-focused approach to data management, and which aims to improve data quality and encourage ownership at a local level. Kellie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me in.
Thanks very much. Good to have you here. So, nearly a year on from GDPR's adoption, what's changed?
To be honest, I think the fact that when I go into meeting rooms with people and I talk about data protection, their first reaction is, GDPR, which is quite novel because 18 months before that, people were like, what GDPR, what? So I think that people have got a greater awareness of the term, but not necessarily what's involved with implementing GDPR.
Yeah, really interesting. So last week, Google was fined a record £44 million, €50 million for quote-unquote a lack of transparency and consent in its data collection practices that violate GDPR law. So it's taken some time for these headline grabbing fines to come through. Everyone was kind of waiting with bated breath. But is this the new normal for GDPR fines?
I think you'll certainly see more significant fines now. I think when 25th of May came last year, the belief that someone would be automatically fined was a little naive. In the summer, Facebook were only fined £500,000, and the question was, well, why is that? Well, they were still investigating previous violations of the Data Protection Act 1998. So it will be, from this point on, I think we'll see a few more higher profile GDPR complaints and fines. But that doesn't mean that the smaller companies are not flying below the radar. They just may not be getting as big a fine that is as headline grabbing as the Google fine.
Really interesting. So GDPR compliance, we hear from our customers and stakeholders who say GDPR, we did a load of work on that in 2017 and in the run-up to the deadline last year. We are compliant. As an expert on data, what do you say to that?
My first question is, if you saw GDPR compliance as a tick box exercise, I would say, well, how are you managing on a day-to-day basis? Because you can have policies and procedures and look on paper as being compliant. But if you were to encounter a breach or were to have a subject access request, would your staff actually know how to handle that? And if the answer to that is no, then in my opinion, you're not compliant. And I don't think anyone's ever going to be 100% compliant, because the reality is that at any point in time, a fault can happen.
Absolutely. And you mentioned subject access requests. So the subject access request, as the ICO defines it, is where individuals have the right to access their personal data. So when it comes to records management specifically, if you don't know what's in your boxes, or if you're not able to confirm what personal identified data, PID, is in your email provider, then you're not compliant. Should businesses be worried?
I think they should. I think one of the key things is really understanding where your information is, because if you get a subject access request, you've got a very limited amount of time to respond to that. You've got 30 days. If your first starting point is, where's the information? Once you've qualified what the SAR is, 30 days is not a lot of time if you're a very large team with very complex systems and paper systems. And I think a lot of people very much think about digital today, and they very much forget about their paper records. And they are just as much subject to the right to access from an individual, whether it be an employee or a current or past customer. So mapping your data, whether it be customer, supplier, staff, it's vital to be able to handle any kind of subject access request, in my opinion.
And anecdotally, are organisations well positioned when you talk about mapping their data? What's the state of play out there?
I would say it varies from business to business. I'd say a lot of smaller businesses have not viewed data protection as something that they should be worried about, which is why the ICO in February last year done a massive campaign to raise the profile that it is about trust, it's about knowing your information, where it is, how to access to it. and it's not just larger organisations. So I think there's a spread. I think there are some very large organisations that probably run on a significant number of Excel spreadsheets in various places and are just as not confident as smaller businesses. So I think it entirely depends on your approach to GDPR. And like I said, if you take an approach where you are on top of it, it's a day-to-day exercise for you, you'll know where your information is, your staff will understand where it is. If you've got no clue, one, what data protection is, or like, oh, well, it's somewhere in the cloud, then I'd say you've got a long way to go, and mapping your information would certainly, in my opinion, be the first place to start looking.
Really interesting. So data management and mismanagement is not just the preserve of one or two people within the organisation.
No. I think you should have someone that takes the leadership of it. I think you should have an executive board that someone's got responsibility for data protection, whether that's you've appointed a data protection officer, or whether you've appointed a data protection lead because you don't qualify to have a DPA. But there should be someone at a senior level that is reporting on any compliance related issues. I think then if you take it down to the more middle management, all of your heads of department should really understand what role they have to play for it. It's not just a HR responsibility, it's not just marketing or IT. They all have a role to play, and I think there should be more openness about those roles and how they can work together and genuinely show accountability. And then I think when you then look down at your staff who are actually handling information on a day-to-day basis, what's their role? You know, they have a role to play, because it will be human error that's going to cause you a breach in the future, or it's going to cause you to have inaccurate information. So for me, it's a top-down approach, but there's also this bottom-up of, if all your staff are genuinely accountable, and I may be asking a lot for everyone to be passionate about the data that they process, but if they understand the role that they play, then absolutely data protection shouldn't be a concern for the top of management, because it's an everyday exercise that they are undertaking. They understand who to talk to, who to raise an issue with, and they're confident it will be resolved.
Yeah, it's fascinating. A lot of what you're saying speaks to, arguably, to transformation within the business, to cultural change, Absolutely. Dare I say it.
Yeah.
How are businesses positioned to adopt a cultural change mindset in regards to data?
I think that's a really, really interesting question. I think it's my first question to anyone that was asking me that. I'd be like, well, if you were to ask your staff, how would you handle a data protection breach, and they don't know, then I would say, or their answer is, I don't want to put my hand up because fear of being told off or named and shamed, then you don't have the right level of data protection culture as one that I would hope that is instilled in companies. So it's, in many ways, it's test, you know, like very much like a fire drill. Why wouldn't you want to test to see not where are the vulnerabilities? And it's not about pointing the finger, it's about, okay, that's gone wrong, how do we fix that, how do we learn from that, and how do we share that across the team, so when something does happen, you're on top of it, there is ownership, there is, yes, we've made a mistake, rather than, you know, you finding out 6 months later that you've had a breach and you're in a whole world of pain. So for me, culture plays a massive part in really being able to be accountable and transparent about data protection.
Fascinating stuff. And can such a culture and compliance, you know, I think you alluded to it earlier, you know, compliance, GDPR, it turns people off, doesn't it? I think compliance can sometimes be viewed as this onerous activity that, you know, businesses have to adhere to. But there is a case for saying that compliance and such a culture that you're describing not only shows a company cares and respects their customer, but arguably it builds a trusting relationship. What's your take on that?
I couldn't agree more. I think the question is, what's the impact on your bottom line? If your customers and your staff lose trust in you in managing their information, what is, not just now, what is the long-term impact on your business? Because people will talk to other people and they may not buy from you in the future because you're perceived as not being trustworthy with data. And for me, my personal information is incredibly important to me. So I want to treat that as fairly and as honestly as I should do. So why shouldn't I apply the same methodology to my clients and to my customers and to my staff's information? It is a privilege to be able to process that information. And I think trust is fundamental to that. And you lose trust, I think, you can't quantify it in terms of value until it happens. But think about what would be the hit on your bottom line, because that's what then gets people's interest in addressing and taking forward change.
Absolutely, finances and spreadsheets.
Yeah. Don't get me on the subject of spreadsheets. We'll be here for far too long.
I won't. Final reflections. If you could leave our audience with one mantra when it comes to data protection, what would that be? Very much because we're people focused, I would make sure that your staff, from the very bottom all the way up to the top, very much understand the role that they play with data protection. It's vital to your success of being compliant. So take a people-focused approach to data protection. Kellie Peters, thank you so much for coming on the show. For listeners, if you like what you're hearing in terms of the content, then please go to The Vault, the website, on www.thevault.crownrms.com, or subscribe on iTunes. Well, you'll find us by typing in quote unquote The Vault Digital Transformation. Thank you so much. We'll see you next month for another episode.